Welcome to the CSS3 project training series. I'm Mike King, your host. And in this tutorial, we're going to look at the text effects that are now available with CSS3. CSS3 contains several new text features that are part of the implementation of the new language. In this tutorial, you'll learn about the following text properties. We're going to talk about text shadow, and we're going to talk about word wrap. We're also going to look at some of the other features that are going to be available or that are proposed to be available that are not quite yet supported in browsers. So CSS3 has also added many new properties to the text functions in CSS3. Many of these new properties we'll cover in the lab of the tutorial. The new properties are listed below. Let's actually talk through these because we're not actually going to cover many of these in the tutorial yet. There'll be an additional tutorial that's added to this when these become supported. But many of these are not quite supported yet. We got hanging punctuation, punctuation trim, text align last, text emphasis, text justify, text outline, text overflow, text shadow we actually will talk about during this tutorial, text wrap, word break, and word wrap. And many of these are not yet supported in the major browsers, but I think you're going to see as popularity for these gain, because actually some of these would be quite handy in the styling of our HTML pages. I think you're going to see the browsers start to support these more and more as popularity for these some of these properties grows. Many of the new features are not yet supported by the major browsers, and you'll see that as we talk through the lab exercises, because they're really not supported. I mean, very few of them are supported in any of the browsers yet. But keep up to date as some of these new properties could be very useful, and I'd not be surprised if popular demand for a few of these could fast track support by some of the browser developers, because some of these actually would come in quite handy as we're designing our HTML pages. All right, so for text shadow and word wrap, which are the two we're going to cover in this tutorial, they are supported across the browsers. With Internet Explorer, text shadow was supported in 9.0, word wrap in 5.5. Chrome supported text shadow on 4.0, word wrap 23.0. Firefox was supported in 3.5 for both text shadow and word wrap. Safari supported text shadow in 4.0 and word wrap in 6.1. And Opera supported text shadow in 9.5 and word wrap in 12.1. So let's move into our development environment and demonstrate what we've been talking about in the presentation and go through some of these new text effects features in CSS3. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop out of our development environment and get into, or drop out of our presentation, I should say, and get into our development environment. Let me go ahead and confirm that our Apache server is up and running, which it is. Good. I'm going to go ahead and use Google Chrome for this particular demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and load my start file, and I'm going to use Sublime Text 2 as my text editor. Notice I've got my default start file already loaded. Just going to go ahead and do a save as. So let's go ahead and save this as example 1 inside that 3014 folder. So this is my example _1.html. I'm going to go back into that folder, refresh it, and let's go ahead and load up that example. All right, so the first thing we do, let's go ahead and demonstrate this text shadow, because it's actually kind of cool, some of the things that we can do with this. I'm just going to go ahead and put a little bit of text in here. I'm going to add an H1 tag and just call this text shadow demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and close out that H1 tag. We all know that we need H1s on all of our HTML pages. It helps with our SEO. And then I'm just going to go ahead and put a sample paragraph text in here. I'm just going to put in this as some sample text. And we're not really going to use this paragraph text other than just for filler. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this and paste it a couple times. And again, it's just going to give us some filler text so we can see stuff on our browser window, in our browser window, as we're having an impact with this text. All right, the next thing I want to do is I want to go up into the head section, and I actually want to add some style tags. So I'm just going to have my opening style tag, and I'm going to come down a few lines with a closing style tag. So that we have our opening and closing style tags so that we can actually add some styling to this heading that we just put into that HTML document. So let's go ahead and identify that with the selector, our H1 selector. Opening my curly brace and closing my curly brace. I'm going to use my text shadow. Put in my my colon, and then what I want to do is let's go ahead and set up how we want this text shadow to work. So what I'm going to do first is, because I'm going to actually have this set up, I want a horizontal shadow, a vertical shadow, and a color. We're going to talk about all the different values that can go in here, but for now we're just going to use a horizontal, vertical, and a color. So I'm going to put in 3 pixels, 3 pixels, and then I want to use a nice light gray color or gray color because we're on a white background. I'm just going to use 999. Let's go ahead and save that change. Let's go ahead and refresh our browser window, and you can see now that we've got this nice darkish gray shadow to our H1 heading. This was never available before in CSS. I mean, this is something new with CSS3. Very cool feature. I mean, there's a lot of cool things we can do with this. We're actually going to do a couple more demonstrations of things we can do. But real quickly, let's talk about the values that can go in here. Keep in mind that this is supported across all of our major browsers currently. So, I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff we can do with this. The first value is the horizontal shadow. So that's the horizontal offset. Right now I've got this set at 3 pixels. I can set it at 1 pixel. Save the change. Refresh it. You'll notice now that my horizontal offset changed to 1 pixel. My vertical offset, or my vertical shadow, I can make that 1 pixel. Save the change, refresh the browser window. So now we've got this 1 by 1 pixel offset. Then I have what's called a blur radius, and the blur radius is optional. I don't actually have a blur radius in this example. Well, let's give it a 2 pixel blur radius. And actually I'm going to go ahead and put these back to 3 and 3 so that you can actually see what we're doing here. Save the change, refresh the browser window. And that's the blur of the actual shadow itself. How sharp is it? You can actually see now that we don't have that sharpness to the letters in the shadow. If I were to take this out, let's give it a blur radius of 0 pixels, so it's sharp. You can see that those letters sharpen up. So that's the third value. The fourth value is the color that we're using right here. Then I have another value, which is no shadow, and I just leave all this blank. Then there's no shadow. The initial value sets the property to its default value. So if I had an initial H1 value and I had a value in my initial, it would actually set it to its default value and inherits this property from its parent element. So I can actually use initial and inherit in here also. Normally don't do that, but we can. And it gives us a couple of other options that we can do with this text shadow feature. So let's look at a couple more examples of what we can do with the text shadow. All right, so let's go ahead and put back some of my initial values. I'm going to go ahead and put this blur effect back in because it actually is kind of cool to have the blur effect in there. Save the change, refresh the browser window, and you can see what happens now with that blur effect. We actually get that. It's a more muted shadow to our actual demonstration. Now let's look at a text shadow on a white text. So what I'm going to do here is let's go back into my style element. Let's go ahead and add a background to the body itself. Because again, there's a lot of cool things that we can do with this. And I'm just going to give the body a background color of CCC. So we're actually going to give the body, actually, you know what, I'm going to make it a little darker than that because I'm going to use a white text. Let's give it 666. Save the change, refresh the browser window. Oh, yeah. We actually have to give it a background color, don't we? That would be a smart move. I forgot to actually use the property keyword in there. Let's go ahead and save that change, refresh the browser window. Now we've got that nice dark background. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and give that H1 a different type. So I'm going to give it a color. We're actually going to change the text color now to white. I'm going to go ahead and save that change, refresh our browser window. And now what we can do is we can actually use this color that we're actually using for our, I'm going to use a black color now for the actual shadow itself. And again, just by changing the way we've done these colors, I mean, we can get a lot of different effects with this text shadow feature that's now available inside CSS3. It's really, really cool. Let's look at another feature that we can do, or something we can do that's a little bit different. Let's do a text shadow with a red glow to it on that H1. So again, same thing. I'm going to set up my text shadow the same way I've got it set up here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out. Okay, so let's look at a different example of something we can do with this text effect or with this text shadow feature. We can actually give these like a glowing effect with our text also. Let me go ahead and remove this background because we're going to go back to our standard black text now. And what I want to do here is let's go ahead and put in a new text shadow for this H1. And it with my colon, let's go 0, 0, 5, and 5 pixels is going to be my blur. Remember, that's the blurring effect. And then I'm going to have a color here. I'm just going to add a greenish color to this. It's going to give us a green glow around that heading. Let's go ahead and save that change, refresh our browser window, and you can see now we've got this green, almost like a neon effect around that text shadow demonstration. And by changing the blur, we can actually change the intensity of that glowing effect to those letters. Decrease it, we can get it a lot smaller and just kind of around the edges. Increase it, we can actually make it almost where it's overpowering the actual text itself. If I were to make this like 15 pixels, it would almost overpower the text itself. So there's a lot of cool things here that we can do with this new text shadow. We can also add multiple shadows to this. I could actually put in another color to this by just adding a comma here. So I've got my text shadow, I've got my first set, then I'm going to say 0, 0, and again I want another blur offset. We'll just make this one 5 pixel, and actually we're going to go ahead and change this one back to, let's make this 4 pixels. Make that 5 pixels, and actually in this one we're actually going to use a different color. So I've got that green, so let's look at using a bluish color or a dark bluish color, so 0cc to this, and that with my semicolon, save that change. Refresh my browser window. Now you see we have this combination of this green and this bluish color, and again offset by these blurs that has the impact as to which one has the most strength and which one kind of takes over the area of that text. So there's a lot of cool things we can do with this text shadow feature inside of CSS3. I highly recommend that you play around with this, experiment with it. A lot of cool stuff that we can do. Keep in mind, remember that first value is the horizontal shadow. And again, for a shadow, it's required. If we wanted to actually have the shadow, it's required. And it positions the horizontal shadow. Negative values are allowed. We can actually have negative values here. The second value is the vertical shadow. Again, required if we want the shadow. The position of the vertical shadow, negative values are also allowed there. Blur radius, which is the third value, the one that we're actually using on this demonstration. It's optional. The default value is 0, but it actually gives you the blur effect from your shadow itself. And again, if you make this nice and tight, nice and small, a small value number, it keeps that shadow very, very sharp around those letters. Then we actually assign the color that we want to use inside that shadow. And then we got a couple other values that aren't used very often. If we leave everything blank, obviously we have no shadow at all. That's default, no shadow. Then we have the initial property. It sets the property to its default value. And then we also have an inherent property which inherits from the parent element of that particular item. So now let's go look at our other feature inside features of CSS3. The other feature I want to look at, or the other text effect that I want to look at that was changed with CSS3 is the word wrap property, because it actually has been changed for the better in my opinion. I'm going to go ahead and put an H2 right below here. And I'm just going to call this word wrap demonstration. And then I'm going to go ahead and close that H2 tag and then go ahead and save this as a different file. I'm going to do a save as. I'm going to save this as my example 2 for this particular demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to go ahead and pull out this text shadow effect. Save our changes. Let's go back and refresh and load up example number 2. And now we're going to do this word wrap demonstration. You'll notice in our paragraph I've actually added a couple of very long words. Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, as anyone's familiar with Mary Poppins, it actually is a real word. And anti-disestablishmentarianism, which is another real word, not with Mary Poppins, but it's up there. It's got a pretty good length to it. I'm going to go ahead and pull off this minimum width for the body. Don't need it. We'll leave the text shadow for the H1 there, even though we don't have an H1 anymore. I will go ahead and actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and make this an H2. And let's go ahead and just add a text shadow back to our H2 just for the sake of our demonstration, so we can continue to march on how we use these inside of our documents, I'm just going to make it a 2 pixel by 2 pixel text shadow. I'm going to go ahead and save that change, refresh my browser window. We got this nice little text shadow now on our word wrap demonstration, although it doesn't look very good because that shadow is actually too dark for it. Let's make it a 999. It looks too much like our text color. There we go. That's a little better. No blur on that one. Now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and show you how we can actually use this new word wrap feature, because it actually is kind of cool. So I'm going to go ahead and add an element, add some styling to our paragraph element, open and close my curly text. First thing I want to do is assign a width so we can actually force these words to break, and I'm just going to give the width a 10em, which is 10 ems. I'm going to give it a border around the actual paragraph itself, because again, this way you can see what's actually occurring. I'm going to make it a 1 pixel solid. I'm just going to make it a very, very dark gray border. So I'll give it a 333. And then right below that, I'm going to use that new word wrap property. And I'm just going to make this normal for now, so you can actually see how this would normally appear before they added the new feature. So let's go ahead and save the change, refresh our browser window. And you can actually see that our two very long words now are extending outside the borders of our paragraph based on how we actually set up the width of that paragraph for the 10ems. What's really cool now is I could actually have CSS3 based on this new break word value inside of CSS3. We can actually set this now to normal, which is what I have it at set now for word wrap, which breaks words only at allowed breakpoints. Or I could actually set it to break words, which allows unbreakable words to be broken. So in other words, it would stay within the boundaries of that paragraph. So if I were to change this to break word and save those changes, you can actually see now it's going to break those words that we didn't break before and keep it inside the boundaries of the paragraph. Where we set that width at 10ems, it's not going to let it overflow outside those boundaries based on that new break word feature, which is kind of cool. I mean, we haven't been able to do that before if we had really long words, and now we can actually force it to break the words even though they shouldn't be broken at those points, so that it maintains the boundaries that we set for the size of the element. I like that. It's kind of cool. We have 4 values that we can put in there. We can put in normal, break word, initial, and inherit. And again, initial and inherit work just like they do with any other CS property. So that's two new text effects features that we've got inside of CSS3, which are very, very cool. They're going to get used a lot. Like I said at the very beginning of the presentation, keep an eye on what's going on with those other features that are currently not supported, because I think popular demand will force support for some of those in the major browsers, because some of them would be very helpful in the way that we design and lay out our HTML pages. So I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.